Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this is Many a True Nerd, and welcome back to the Many a True Nerd Top 50 Games of all time. And, okay, tonight we're diving in to the top 25, so you know what, let's just get stuck straight in, kicking off tonight with number 25, LA Noir from 2011, and LA Noir is, to my mind, easily the best detective game of all time, and I think a really significant part of that is because it's a game that I'm able to be bad at. Okay, let me explain, because that's an odd thing to say, and this only just struck me recently. So, in most detective games, and indeed most cases of being asked to do any sort of investigation in any video game whatsoever, the game doesn't actually allow you to do much in the way of deduction. Like, the game might pretend you do, by say putting all the clues on a board and making you attach them together with string in order to solve the mystery, but there's rarely actually a failure condition. You won't be allowed to move on until you've located all the clues and connected them together in the precise way that the game wants you to, and I can understand why that might be the case. Most games are structured so to get to the next scene, you've got to solve the mystery in front of you first, and this here is where I think the structure of this game is cocky genius, because this game is split up into a large number of fairly small cases, and while they do offer hints towards a broader plot, overwhelmingly, each case exists in its own tiny universe. And that means the game can actually afford to let you fail if you don't do your job as a detective well enough. And fail you most certainly can, by missing a piece of evidence at a crime scene, say, or by messing up an interview, meaning you lack the right testimony down the line. You can completely mess up a case and send the wrong person to jail, and then get yelled at by your boss for being incompetent. And that's cocky great, because victory means nothing if defeat isn't a possibility. Solving a mystery isn't rewarding unless you could also get it wrong. And that's why success in LA Noir feels amazing. And I haven't even gotten round to the incredibly unique interview mechanics, watching characters' faces for a tell that might indicate how to question them, or how incredibly stylish the 1940s LA setting is, or how driving and shooting both feel really damn solid, even though they're not even the focus of the game. Just everything about this game is great, and it's a tragedy it never got a sequel. Number 24, Mario Kart Super Circuit from 2001, and okay, I suspect this one is going to surprise a bunch of people, because not only has Mario Kart Super Circuit never been featured on the channel, I barely ever mentioned it before, so, you know, I can understand the confusion, but this one got here for a very personal reason. You see, coming out for the GBA back in 2001, I was in secondary school at the time, and me and a whole bunch of friends all got this game, and we all got together over lunch break, like all the time, and played the multiplayer, because it was one of the GBA games where you could hook 4 GBAs together for 4-player races, and it was just some of the most fun I have ever had in any multiplayer game ever. Maybe I'm biased because of that, but I still think between the tracks and the weapons and all the rest of it, this is the best Mario Kart game of all time. Number 23 is Xenoblade Chronicles from 2010, though it was re-released on the Switch and much more recently. And Xenoblade Chronicles is here for one very simple reason, and that's the story. For me, this game is all about the story. One of my favourite stories in all of gaming, in fact. It starts off nice and simple, mind. Man fights robots to avenge dead friend. But the scale, that's what makes Xenoblade Chronicles work in every way. The map is absolutely cocking huge, and gives your journey across the Bionis a real sense of being an epic quest. And it's a big game too, easily 100 hours if you take your time and explore every area, with a huge amount of characters and plot to fill that space. Every main character is brilliantly realised, with some of my favourite voice acting of all time, and the story goes to some wild places, though you may need the ability to suspend your disbelief on occasion. The action does occasionally skew towards incredibly over-the-top anime style, but if you're willing to just go with it, it's a game just swimming in action, drama, humour and hearts. Number 22, Unpacking from 2021, and okay, there are many things I love in video games, but two that show up really high on that list are getting to organise things and environmental storytelling. and Unpacking is basically a game of environmental storytelling through the act of organising things. At its core, this game is a series of scenes where you unpack a person's possessions as they move into a new room. Now, that's a fun puzzle by itself, as you try to determine a solution that's both functional and decorative. But what's more interesting is how this game tells its story, because you're never given the name of the person whose stuff you're unpacking, or any details about them whatsoever, but you can deduce certain things as time goes by, like where they are in their life right now, say going to university, or in a house share just after graduating. Now, this is all lovely, but what really elevates this game to this point on the list is the moment. And if you've played this game, you know what I'm talking about. The moment where you realise there isn't space for a very particular item in a very specific flat that you're currently moving into, and it was honestly one of the most horrible narrative gut punches I've ever experienced in a game, and it came from a game about unpacking a box. That alone justifies this game's presence on the list. Number 21, Stellaris from 2016, and Stellaris will always hold a really special place in my heart, because Stellaris was my first ever Paradox game, and if I hadn't played Stellaris, very badly I'm sure, I very likely would never have tried Crusader Kings, another franchise that's already been featured on this list, and I never would have made some of my favourite series in the history of the channel. On top of that, it's just a wonderful example of a game that just keeps getting better and better as time goes by. Starting back in 2016 as a solid, if maybe somewhat bland space strategy game, the Stellaris of today is almost unrecognisable after a series of reworks. And for me, after all that, Stellaris is in a beautiful place right now, and to my mind it's got just about the right level of complexity. Stellaris is deep and interesting, but rarely gets confusing. The soundtrack is exceptional too. In fact, I very specifically noted that Creation and Beyond was an epic track the very first time I played the game on the channel, and the space fights are cocky gorgeous. Just, in general, I could very happily play this game for an entire weekend. An absolute cooking star of a game. Number 20, Metroid Prime from 2002, and okay, this here is a fascinating game, if only for its behind-the-scenes story. If you've never heard it before, the short version is that Retro, the team behind it, were looking for a long time like they were in a lot of cocky trouble, and it was open knowledge that Nintendo were concerned about the Metroid game that they'd entrusted to them. And I remember the gaming press at the time were really skeptical about Metroid Prime 2, but then, somehow, through some cooking miracle, they went and produced one of the best games of all time. A game so perfect that they re-released it basically unchanged 20 years later on the Switch, and it's still bloody phenomenal. There is a huge amount that I could praise about Metroid Prime. It looks fantastic, it feels grand in scale, the bosses are all brilliant fun to fight, and it never fails to reward exploration. But the one thing that always sticks out to me as something particularly special is the atmosphere, because Metroid Prime is an incredibly lonely game. You don't speak to another character for the entire course of it. Now, that probably doesn't sound like much, but when you mix it with the game's haunting soundtrack, somehow, for me at least, it gave Metroid Prime a really unique lonely atmosphere that you very rarely see in games. It's just a really special, unique experience that works on a whole bunch of levels. Number 19, Subnautica, from various points between 2014 and 2018 actually, because yes, thanks to early access it kind of like, came out in various bits and pieces over the course of, you know what, screw it, it came out at some point in the mid-2010s, it's fine. And yes, Subnautica is a game that I have absolutely fallen in love with, and it's all about atmosphere, because Subnautica is an incredibly effective horror game. Now, that may not be how it's generally labelled, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Like, you spend the whole of Subnautica going deeper and deeper into an environment where everything else is better suited to living in it than you are. You are slow, you can't see well, you can barely fight. And every meter you go further down, you just keep entering more and more hostile territory. It's an experience that, at best, is somewhat unnerving, and at worst, is utterly terrifying. Now, I've played a fair few horror games in my time, and almost none of them have done a better job at getting under my skin, better than Subnautica does, simply by sending a distant echoing roar in my direction. And I admire how perfectly it's engineered to freak me out. Number 18, The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker from 2003, and let's start with the obvious here. It looks incredible to this day, which is especially funny if you were actually around at the time when Wind Waker was announced, because there was one hell of a backlash against it when it first appeared, which is probably the reason Twilight Princess has its really dark, realistic look. Sorry, I'm getting off topic there. The point is, Wind Waker is just a joy to play. Sailing across the vibrant blue ocean with the game's wonderful score playing is just a delightful experience, especially given it was a fantastically open world Zelda game. Like, as soon as you had the ability to control the wind, really early on in the game, you could basically go anywhere you wanted across the Great Ocean. And I know some people found the amount of sailing tiresome, but for me that was never an issue. I could very happily sail back and forth in Wind Waker for hours on end. At the end of the day, if I had to play one Zelda game right now at gunpoint, as odd a scenario as that is, it would definitely be Wind Waker every cocking time. Number 17, Hitman Blood Money from 2006, and okay, this here is the peak of the Hitman franchise. Like, I love the recent trilogy, but they don't even come close to Blood Money, which gets everything right, and let's start with, the baffling one that no other Hitman game seems to understand. In Blood Money, you get paid to do assassinations, because you're an assassin. So doing your job earns money, and if you do it well, you get more money. And then you use the money to buy gear to be better at assassination. It's really bloody weird that this is the only Hitman game that does this right. Like, that feels like it can't be right, but it is, and it's just downright cookie bizarre. But you know what? Let's move on to the other things this game gets right, because there are cooking plenty of them. Like, say, knocking people unconscious requires the use of one of your very limited syringes, so you've got to plan the mission properly if you want to get the best rating. And speaking of which, I think the difficulty is pitched perfectly in Blood Money. Silent Assassin is doable, but you need to have a good plan and to execute it well, if you'll pardon the pun. The levels are big fun adventure playgrounds with loads of places to explore, and speaking of levels, they're the gold standard for this franchise. Interesting, unique locations that all look and feel distinct, and the whole thing looks great to this day. Basically, it's pretty much the perfect Hitman game, and I have no idea how they're ever going to beat it. Number 16, Oblivion from 2006, and Oblivion for me was a wonderful experience. And okay, I will admit, I'm a sucker for precisely this kind of open world Bethesda action RPG. But even so, I had an amazing time with Oblivion, and I think I figured out why. You see, as I mentioned before, sometimes game balance is boring and ludicrous, silly, overpowered nonsense is fun. And blimey, did I have some stupid, overpowered, broken fun with Oblivion. Like, sure, you start off as weak as a kitten, but blimey, the magic in this game. When you start, crafting your own spells and enchanting your own gear, in next to no time at all, I was defeating demons by simply sprinting past them and bypassing barriers by jumping over them. It was broken and silly and perfect, and I loved it. The world was wonderful too. Every town had its own architecture and style, and the faction quests in particular were some of the finest and most interesting I've ever played in a Bethesda game. The tests for the Mages Guild, trick assassinations for the Dark Brotherhood, it was just a wonderful game, and I suspect if I played it again, it might end up even higher up this list. Number 15, Perfect Dark from 2000, and I love Perfect Dark. I'm pretty damn certain it's my most played N64 game of all time, and to my mind, it's maybe the most generous game I've ever played. I mean, put aside its brilliant campaign, which you can also speedrun to unlock cheats, a fantastic idea inherited from GoldenEye, and put aside the fact that you can play that entire campaign in cooperative multiplayer, and put aside the firing range that had challenges for every single gun in the game, and put aside the beating every level on the highest difficulty, unlocked custom difficulty sliders. Put all of that aside, even though that's easily hundreds of hours of entertainment, because I want to chat about the combat simulator. At first glance, it probably just looks like the multiplayer, but it wasn't. Oh no, because you could also populate the maps with AI opponents, up to 8 of them, who you could assign special personalities to, and then arrange into teams and give orders to. Oh, and you could also add those sims in anyway, even if there were multiple people playing, and sorry, just remember for a second, this was a cocking N64 game. It is honestly baffling this was even able to run. But it did, and it was wonderful. So wonderful, in fact, that they re-released it not that long ago. Not remade, barely even remastered, because it didn't need it. It was already cocking perfect. Number 14, Advance Wars 2 from 2003, and okay, I can't prove it, as I don't believe it's like, tracked anywhere, but I'm pretty confident that Advance Wars 2 is probably one of my most played games of all time. Now, in case you missed it or its recent remaster on the Switch, it's a turn-based war strategy game that I hold is one of the best balanced games of all time. Every single unit has got both a function and a counter, and against a skilled player, and I've played a bit of this in multiplayer, fights can really sway back and forth. And if you want to play alone, there's a fantastic campaign with a surprisingly well-written story, and a hard mode campaign for extra challenge too. Though what really makes this game live forever to my mind is the custom games of the War Room, where you can set up a game of your liking on a ridiculous number of maps, and if you somehow get bored of every single one of those, there's a map builder, so you can create your own maps as well. Basically, if I was going to be marooned on a desert island for a year and could only take one game with me, this would be a bloody strong contender. Number 13, Fallout 4 from 2015, and here we go. It's cocking time for a Fallout game, and what I love about the entire Fallout franchise is every game brings something different to the table. Like, the reason I love Fallout 4 is very different to the reason I love Fallout 3, and that's different to the reason I love New Vegas, and we'll get to them later. Though, obviously, I can't discuss literally every aspect of Fallout 4 here. Like, I couldn't even fit in everything when I did a 90-minute video essay on this exact topic, but okay. Let's talk, at the very highest level about some of the highlights, because I just love survival mode. I love how it converts a relatively arcadey experience into a genuinely hardcore game that doesn't just ramp up enemy health, but instead forces you to balance risk and reward, where even sleeping to drop a save weakens you by sapping your adrenaline. And I love the city of Boston. I think as a physical space, it might be one of Bethesda's masterpieces. And this is a dev team whose biggest skill has always been building impressive physical spaces. You see, the thing about Boston is, so many games say, oh yeah, here's a ruined city, but either it's barely a small town, or, if it is a good size, it's overwhelmingly empty. And Boston in Fallout 4 is neither. It actually feels like a city in size, but even so, wherever you go, there's always stuff to find. Shops and houses and apartments and banks and churches and sewers, and the verticality of it as well. You can fight your way to the rooftops. It's just a huge space that sprawls out in every direction, and it still takes my breath away to this day, and I could keep talking about Fallout 4 all day long. The smooth gunplay, the weapon crafting, the junk economy, how Avats only playstyles actually viable these days, but at the end of the day, what matters is this. Fallout 4 is my most played game ever on Steam, and even so, I'm not even close to getting bored with it. That's the ultimate proof right there. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of part 3. Let's wrap things up there, because coming up tomorrow, it's the grand cocking finale. There's going to be, some games you're expecting there, but there might just be a surprise or two yet to come. So hopefully you join me for that. But in the meantime, I've been John, this has been Many a True Nerd, and this has been my top games of all time. Thank you very much, and goodbye. This is the face of death, okay? This is what my sudden death looks like. Do not engage before we arrive. Do not engage. What are you doing? I specifically said don't. Oh, no.
No, John.
Oh, he likes that. The Romans touched me.